So I got a jail story. A little bit of context. So in about 2018, when God of War came out, uh, and much like my fascination with Greek mythology, when God of War took place in the Greek mythos, I developed some fascination with the Norse mythos. This evolved into me eventually purchasing the Neil Gaiman's Tales from Norse Mythology book, and eventually after that, the Poetic Edda, and the Prose Edda. Uh, just because it's um, not really where I want to be spending as much of my time, but I do occasionally flip through it. So at the time, um, I was so enamored by Nordic culture that I found out about people who have Norse tattoos, and I was pretty convinced that I wanted to have some sort of a Nordic themed tattoo. I first got this, uh, which is a very typical Vegvisir. I think is how it's pronounced, and it has the alphabet around it. And it's supposed to be each point being the different realms of Norse mythology, with Midgard in the center. And I got this one, which is the Helm of Awe, which is a very similar design, but it's much more uniform and it's kind of confusing what it's supposed to mean. Some people say it's like protection, uh, this is supposed to be meant for like guide. Eventually, a roommate that I had told me. He said it's kind of fucked up because a lot of your neo Nazis in prisons like to have no tattoos. I said, "What do you mean?" He showed me a picture of Nazis and have like tattoos all over their arms and all over their bodies, and I was kind of horrified because I was like, "Dude, I'm literally just fascinated by this one particular like culture, and I just thought the style was pretty cool, and that's pretty much all it was." And I felt as if it was ruined for me. So, if you have watched any of these videos, you've known that for a while I worked at a jail in my county that I left for managerial and mental health reasons. And there's a story that I'm very often reminded, and particularly a lot in recent times with some of the people are saying, have been saying for a while. So I because this was a military, they wanted you to have a military style haircut. I had to shave every single day, pretty much, or maintain shave, and they wanted my hair not to touch my ears. I was a little bit rebellious. I would try to go as long as I can sometimes without getting haircuts, and very often my boss would tell me to go get a haircut. To the point where one time they sent me out of work to go get a haircut, and then I had to come get a haircut in the middle of my shift. That had happened one time. So I get a haircut, um, and I'm cheap, and I don't really care what my hair looks like because I'm not really trying to impress people with my hair most of the time. So I go to Great Clips, and I not nine times out of ten what I ask for is very simple. For most people who have cut hair pretty frequently, who are familiar with hair clippers, you tell them you want to shorten the sides, shorten the top, really like you pretty much shave the sides, and just kind of fade it. Just do a high and tight fade. Just a horrible job. She started at the top. She started way too short. I forgot to get a haircut and saw a bald spot. I started panicking for a second. And long story short, the whole haircut was ruined, and I basically gave up and told her to cut my hair off. I still paid her because I was a deputy, and most people in my area knew that, or people who were familiar with who I was, or a lot of people knew that. So I couldn't really make too much of a mess of a situation. I couldn't really argue, so I just paid to kind of like move on. I said whatever, I'll grow back. It was $20, $30 haircut. So basically, I was bald. It was the only time ever in my life been bald. Contrary to it being the only time that I was bald, I actually didn't mind the way that I looked, and I actually really liked it because I am a little bit of a heavy guy, and sometimes I get sweaty, and it's nice to not have to worry about hair or brushing it. Because when I went back to work, I worked in a pod that was called Three Bravo at the time. It's still called Three Bravo, but I don't know who they house there now because I haven't been there in over a year. But at the time that, at least at that point in time, that was where the felony uh, or felony probation or prior prison record people have gone normally go to. They have a classification systems in jails and prisons, and for us, it was like if you were green, you were like a worker. If you're blue, you were minimum security. Orange was medium security, and red was maximum security. You can have oranges with blues, or you can have them with reds, but you can't have blues with reds. So that way, you typically are keeping people of similar charged seriousness, I guess you can call it, uh, together. And they called Three Bravo the Thunderdome because that was the most felonious group. Sometimes there was one point in time years ago where that there was a lot of people that were like really bad about kicking the door whenever they didn't get their way, so they called it the Thunderdome, and the name just kind of stuck. And to my surprise, a lot of people liked my haircut, and I was like, oh, okay. Some of these people are being really nice to me today. Some people were not being nice to me, but that I was a jailer and they were inmates, so I was like, some people were being really nice to me. And then I noticed that some of the people that were being nice to me were also the ones that had swastikas. It really clicked uh, when I think one of the particularly ignorant rednecks that may have had family in the clan told me that he thinks of me as his brother, which would really be really, really uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, that the white is like kind of getting ready to start. And I got to a point to where I sat everybody down and told all of them that I hated all of them, and that the only color that I cared about was the stripe patterns on their shirts, and that I don't really particularly care for it. And the only reason why I'm there is because I collect a paycheck, and the only reason why they're there is because they fucked up or their lawyer fucked them. And I would like to go back to that arrangement. Long story short, Nazis also ruined the idea of me being a bald person. I say all of this to get to another point. Um, and that is especially when I was working there, and in recent years it's been coming up a lot, particularly people who complain about woke or complain about people that call you racist. Um, it really bothers me when people complain about that because there are things that you can do that are signifiers for racist groups that are ruined because of racist groups. And I feel like as a society, we have this, I guess you can call it, and to be humorous for recent politics, woke derangement syndrome. Uh, it's to a point where we're more mad at the people upset about the racist thing than the actual everybody. There was a TV show, and I hope somebody might know what I'm talking about, but there was a TV show where somebody was talking about a Hitler mustache, and they were like shaving, and they saw the Hitler mustache, and they said it actually looks really good. It's so bad that one man has to ruin for everybody. That's kind of how I feel about most things. I really feel like things are and because of racist groups of people, they don't necessarily very much like to associate things, and it's a signifier. Like, they don't plan a terrorist organization; they call them militias, and I find that weird. It's weird that they're not called terrorists, and it always get kind of annoying to me because officers that I worked with, an inmate would call them racist. And I feel like the way that they would react to it was always wrong because they would just get defensive and argumentative, or they would basically just try to avoid them altogether. And then they would basically complain about it to the point where they were like, I can't believe they call me racist, instead of actually trying to understand how the dynamic is actually working here. I have had people in private conversation in deputy uniform come up to me and say racist shit to the point to where it was very uncomfortable. I have other people who have told me I've heard very anti-Semitic shit from fellow officers. And contrary to popular belief, the reason why it doesn't get reported isn't because of a mass conspiracy. It's because of careerism and because it's kind of hard to prove and it's a serious accusation. And blue falcons and anti-snitching codes that police officers like to criticize criminals for having, they also have themselves. They literally will, it literally is a thing to actually stand up for principles, for your principles in that kind of environment, to the point to where even if you said something, nothing's ever happened. And I have asked supervisors what I should do about it, and more often than not, they tell me there's nothing really can do. It's a hearsay thing, it's an uncomfortable thing. Uh, and they just kind of wanted to avoid it altogether. Most people don't call me racist at all. And if they did think I was racist, they'd say it. I don't really confront me about many of the things. There have been times, most of the time, people compliment me on my tattoos. And there are people that get a little bit uncomfortable until they know me personally because they know that I'm just a little bit of a geek. And I treat fiction and fascinating stories more seriously than I treat my real life most of the time. And I've also noticed that when it comes to this topic, people tend to lose a lot of their curiosity. They tend to get very uncomfortable. They tend to get very scared of saying the wrong thing. And I think it's because partly uh, there's a lot of closeted racists who just feel like they can't talk about it because if they share their real feelings, they would kind of be outed. But also people who kind of listen to those racists and they think that their more minor opinions or harmless opinions or things that they think that they just don't really understand where they came from, and they might actually otherwise have a lot of really important life lessons they can learn from this topic. Had they been curious about it, they feel discouraged because they're listening to the wrong people about this. I think this is kind of reflected in our highly HR ification of everything in our culture is what I like to call it. I find it weird how much we're referring to HR lately and how everything start is slowly starting to feel like HR and I feel like people are calling that woke when in actuality it's just capitalism. And I think a lot of this woke paranoia is just capitalism and people trying to make sure that their stock prices and public image are perfect to the point of avoiding controversy at all costs. I think that and the edification of our society kind of go hand in hand. That everything kind of has to be very clearly messaged and very producer pleasing, CEO pleasing, or managerial pleasing. I don't think that most of our conversations about these controversial topics that kind of dictate how we're going to look at each other is being dealt with in a healthy manner because all it is it's really people who want to be the most correct people versus people who want to feel like they can't talk and those people are trying to live ordinary lives anyway. It's just a very awkward topic because it raises something that affected my job when I was a deputy, but I wasn't allowed to talk about it, and I wasn't allowed to really explain too much about it to other people because of that fear of being perceived as wrong, that fear of of what would happen if people are feeling like they're being called out for their bad reaction. But in that fear, I learned how to actually be a little bit more productive when it comes to dealing with people who are a lot more hostile towards you in these topics. And I think we're so used to being defensive to people and to worry about the liability of our words that we forget to actually talk like human beings. I see a lot of the same things in the conversations about the movie Obsession and how oh, what was the guy's name? There's a YouTuber. Oh, I'm just terrible with names. Empty Signifier. Empty Signifier when he said, the reason why when he said this and the fact that he took a more nuanced approach to when he reviewed the movie made me more open to see it. I think really said it all when he said, you gotta let people kind of like play around in that gray area about like how much like there they actually are in that movie, and you gotta let people kind of acknowledge like here is where I would probably have stopped. Uh, Here is where I think it's reasonable, and let that kind of be an open dialogue about it, and stop just coding every single thing that Bear does as inherently wrongful because he's not the bad guy the entire movie. He's a little bit of a pansy, but that's pretty much it. And I think the same thing can go for race a lot of the time. And I think that this is a more effective way of communicating it towards conservatives because I think conservatives have been so allowed to control the narrative to where they've made people think that nobody is allowed to talk about it. And we're so used to attacking conservative ideas that we're not really communicating with the public about our ideas. Just my food for thought. I don't really know where else I'm going with this, and I'm probably stopping the video now because I don't really know what else to say, and I'll probably keep talking myself into a ADHD uh, branch that probably has nothing to do with the original conversation. But yeah, that was the story, and that was kind of what I learned from it, and kind of why I look at things in a not necessarily a right or wrong, but how it is being communicated, how is being communicated, and what are the intentions of that communication. I think that's kind of the more important thing because context really does matter. But shouting context whenever you're being accused of a bad thing and then not actually addressing it or admitting when you're wrong or understanding somebody else's feelings and just saying context because you want to avoid a conversation is not really working.